As I told you, I have not written down my speech. I have noted down certain points in an unsystematic manner, not in a schematic fashion. And I would be presenting this before you, not as a lecture, but by way of initiating a discussion, so that if I falter, there are many eminent persons here in the audience. Similarly, the chairman, who is a very well-known scholar and writer, known not only in India but also abroad. So you can correct me. I'll be making certain observations purely in a tentative form, so that I will get your responses, in the light of which I can revise and develop my ideas. So it is in a purely kaleidoscopic, iridescent manner that I am going to share with you some of my thoughts on Mahatma Ayangani, the greatest social reformer Kerala has seen. Before going into this subject, I should make a confession that I promised to speak on historicizing and contemporizing Ayangani. This is a very Herculean task. Only after giving promise to Sunija that I thought that I was biting more than I can chew. So there will be gaps in my presentations, which I am sure you will be able to fill. Regarding the attempt at historicizing Ayangani, I would make one prefatory observation, that there is nothing like objective history. There is nothing like inclusive history. History is determined by the purpose of history writing, history as a craft. And this purpose determines the focus of history, source materials, and historiography. Historiography is the methodology of history. There are different methods of writing history. There can be a cultural approach, political, social, or economic, as Marx did. Marx explained history in real terms, economic terms. So there is no unique historiography, nor is there any objective history. Who writes history is not important, because Jagajeevan Ram wrote about the scheduled caste in India in 1983. He doesn't mention Dr. Ambedkar even once in that book. It is possible to write about caste struggles without considering the class contents. Similarly, it is possible to write about class struggles without considering the caste content. Now, Ayyangali, Mahatma Ayyangali lived in Kerala at a time when there was not only untouchability but also unseeability, that the untouchables were not supposed to be seen by the upper caste. Ayyangali was an illiterate person. But then the photo of Ayyangali, his turban, his dress, similarly he used to travel in a bullock cart, not the usual bullock cart, and he knew martial art. This question has been often raised in the case of Ambedkar. Ambedkar was in suit always. Now, this was done deliberately because in olden days, one's caste identity could be known by his dress, by his work, by his name, and by the idiom of speech, language in which one was speaking. Actually, there are only two languages in the world: language of the oppressor and language of the oppressed. The other things are variants, formalized academic languages. As Sunetra rightly points out in her note, Ayyangali conducted a series of agitations. He made a large number of speeches in the Srimulam Assembly. Ayyangali was in the Travancore state. Travancore was a native state, in the southernmost tip of present state of Kerala. He was a Srimulam Assembly member. His assembly speeches are rendered into English and published in the appendix to the census reports 21 and 31. Decennial census reports. Now, this I am making for two reasons. One is that Sunetra pointed out that there is an attempt at appropriating Ayyangali. First it was ignoring Ayyangali, then appropriating Ayyangali. Left parties appropriating. Now, this is not a very serious matter for political parties. Unlike Adivasis in India, who live in contiguous territories, Dalits are not a political force. They cannot decide the political fate of India. Not only Dalits of Kerala, but in the entire country, Dalits are not a political force. That is what the victory and the decline of Mayavati shows. This is because of the distribution of Dalit population. Dalits form only 10 to 14% of the electorate in every constituency. whether you take a parliamentary constituency or an assembly constituency. It is possible for a candidate to win an election without getting a single Dalit vote. It is possible for a person to lose an election if he or she gets 100% of Dalit votes. That is the way our constituencies are formed. Dalit population is dispersed because their habitation is determined by rice cultivation, not by any other reasons, because they were agnostic slaves first, then semi-bonded agrarian workers. Then in some regions like Kerala, Palakkad or Alapi, free laborers, what Marx called generalized commodity production. Labor itself becoming a commodity which can be bought and sold freely. Dalits are not a political force in India. Then why this appropriation? I will just mention the point which I will elaborate later. Some political, some social conscientization around the legacy of Ayyangali has started in Kerala of late. This has not matured into a sustainable political force. But then some leaders, Dalit leaders in Kerala, have started raising demand for land. Dalit demand for land. See, Laha Gopalan, for example. Gopalan raised this. He was arrested, put in jail. Actually, the fear of the Dalits and other marginalized and excluded sections raising such a concrete demand for access to and control over resources. It is this fear that prompts political parties to appropriate such figures, not for Dalit votes. Dalit votes are not significant. Now, what did Ayyangali do historically? The most important thing, Sunita has already mentioned, for temple entry, similarly the right to work on public streets, and other things. More importantly, what gives Ayyangali a niche in social history is the struggle he led in 1905. And he demanded admission for Pulaya children in schools. Pulaya is the generic term which was then used for the untouchables, the present day Dalits. Now, untouchable children were denied admission in schools. So he gave a clarion call to the untouchables to stop agricultural labor. work was paralyzed in and around Trivandrum. Agricultural work in the peak season. Now, Iyengar was using the might of the working class. When in 1905, October Revolution was in 1917, India got independence much later. So an illiterate person who had not read Marx or Lenin had this vision to understand the potential of the working class and convert that potential into agitational politics on a very concrete demand. This is perhaps the greatest lesson that one can draw while historicizing Iyengar. So his condition, his characteristics, and the condition of Kerala in general in those days, around that time, Swami Vivekananda had called Kerala a lunatic asylum. Caste system was the sharpest in Kerala compared to all other regions in India. And it was the sharpest in Malabar. Those of you who are from the Malabar region would know this. And in North Malabar, more specifically. So in such a situation, an illiterate person who had not read the theory was mobilizing the people on the basis of their strength. This is the greatest lesson. When you are going to fight somebody, you should not think about your weakness. You should be thinking about your strength. What all positive strengths you have, then only you will succeed. So envisioning the potential strength and strategizing that, this is what Iyengar did historically. Now, the other point I would make is, I told you two prefatory points I would make, is the attempt to ignore Iyengar. Appropriation is of a recent origin. You can see in major history texts in Kerala, you don't see his name. See, for example, E.M.S. Namboodiripad has given a class analysis of Kerala history. So, some of us used to ask E.M.S. Namboodiripad, why don't you mention Iyengar? Because we periodically used to meet at AKG Center and discuss socio-economic and political issues. Every time, he gave the reply that I had not heard of Iyengar. And in other texts also you don't see. Probably, Iyengar finds a place in history in books written by non-historians. For example, Chandarasheri. Chandarasheri was not an academic historian. Prasad, is he still alive? He is not an academic historian, nor is he a career historian. in his books you find. Similarly, in the writings of Sharada Mani. Sharada Mani is a sociologist. She was in Indian Statistical Institute, Calcutta. In her book, Emergence of a Slave Caste, Pulayas of Kerala. These are the two prominent sources in which Ayyangali's contribution had been documented systematically and academically. Otherwise, the well-known writings of well-known historians ignore his contributions. EMS considered social reformers only up to Srinarayana Guru. And Srinarayana Guru got prominence because of a few reasons. One thing, he himself was a great scholar, Sanskrit scholar. Secondly, the Irava movements, SNDP, had been gaining strength. They established schools, later on colleges. Now in Kerala it is very difficult to get a degree without studying at least one book written by Kumaranasar. So, ignoring Ayangali was a trend, a tendency. Now coming to the contemporary situation, how do we contemporize? Now I am going to make very broad observations because speaking on Ayangali gives me two opportunities. One thing, to pay tribute to that great social reformer, and two, that gives you an aperture, an opening to look into the socio-economic and political situation in Kerala, and also by extension in the country as a whole. Caste system, for example. Dr. Ambedkar's classical work, Annihilation of Caste, which he wrote in 1936. Caste, for left parties in general and communist parties in particular, was considered as a superstructure phenomenon. Only those communists inspired by the writings of Gramsci, Althusser, they tried to change this. Dr. Ambedkar's contribution to the caste system in analyzing caste, like Ayangali, was that caste system was considered as a basic structure rather than a superstructure phenomenon. Caste system determined economically the economic role of caste. Many of you might have studied this. It determined the structure of ownership of property, who could own property and who could not own property. Two, it determined the division of labor, who could do what job. Three, it determined income distribution. distribution of social income, social product. And four, appropriation of social surplus. Who could appropriate the surplus and who could use it for more accumulation of capital, which is the central defining tendency of capitalism. Indian capitalism is built on Dalit labor and upper caste capital. That capital includes physical, finance, and intellectual. All these three types of capital. And here, as Iyengar rightly essentialized, land caste relations, relations which were of a symbiotic nature, one determining the other. Now in the present day Kerala and also in India as a whole, there was never an anti-caste struggle. Whether by Dalits or by OBCs, there have been no anti-caste struggles. There have been only anti-upper caste struggles. Anti-upper caste struggles are not able to annihilate caste. Everybody is against caste while talking. But caste is still, if not the determining factor, is the limiting factor. The terms, you think about these terms discussed with Professor Ramaya. It is still the limiting factor. Now, on the basis of the legacy of Iyengar and Dr. Ambedkar, one can say that caste will not disappear. Because the material base of the caste system is not changing. Caste is a material base. That base is not changing. And caste is taking new forms. What are the new forms? MGNREGA, for example. That this is actually a program and for perpetuating the Dalit conditions, physical labor. Dalits are eligible only for physical labor. That also only when the Dalits work on others' land or develop public infrastructure for developing their own houses or their own surroundings, MGNREGA is seldom used. So present day caste distinctions take the form of government policies and programs. This is very interesting, modernizing the society. I won't go deep into it, but I would make a few observations. In Western societies, particularly European societies, modernization was used to negate tradition. But in India, we are using modernization for modernizing tradition, new technology. So, computer written horoscope. Similarly, Jyotisham through TV channels. That we are modernizing tradition. Modernization, therefore, did not lead to neutralization or removal of pre-modern trends, tendencies, values, customs and practices. Annihilation of caste and secularization of society is, in material terms, a question of redistribution. Redistributing land, water, technology, and credit. Once we achieve these, then the caste problem in India will be solved. But don't think that caste considerations are used only by upper caste. No. Dalits are also using caste. Lower castes are also using caste for various purposes. Reservation, political, and other types of reservations. Anything useful will not disappear. That is a universal fact. Whether it is caste, race, or anything which serves a purpose will not disappear. Now what happened in Kerala? Just before the appropriation of Ayyangali started, land reforms. They said Kerala introduced radical land reforms. First of all, radicalism and reform do not go together. These are mutually exclusive terms. You cannot say revolutionary reform. If it is a reform, it cannot be revolutionary. If it is a revolution, it is not a reform, it is revolution. Total change. Land reforms in Kerala, implemented since January 1st, 1970, started with the slogan, land to the tiller of the soil, which the undivided Communist Party adopted in 1955. To the soil. But when land reforms were introduced, tillers of the soil did not get land, arable land. Now this actually perpetuated the caste system because land question quintessentially is a caste question, and caste question in its turn is a land question. Therefore, many people got alienated from this gradually. Dalits themselves did a mistake. Dalits are earlier and also now. Slow in responding to challenges. Today also. In the days of land reforms, they did not raise the demand for two, three reasons. One thing, communist parties had appropriated the right to speak for them. Secondly, the fear complex that the Dalits have. Dalits have certain legacies which Iyengarli fought to remove. What are these legacies? Fear psychosis, a culture of silence, diffidence, lack of motivation, inspiration, and a very low aspirational level. These are equally applicable to students. Now, these are legacies which you cannot sweep under the carpet. A culture of silence, which is very dangerous. Silence of the oppressed is more dangerous than the violence of the oppressor. Because it is this culture that tends to perpetuate oppression. Now some of the Marxist leaders are saying Dalits got Hartman rights. But the basic slogan raised since 1955 was not homestead right to the homestead dweller, but land to the tiller of the soil. Land to the tiller of the soil was actually a legitimation process. Ronald Herring has written about this repeatedly in 1983. Land reforms in Kerala, redistribution of privileges. That's the title. The best book that you find on land reforms in India is a small book, a collection of essays by D.D. Kosambi, Exasperating Essays, in which Kosambi says only 1% of the total cultivable land was found as surplus. Because just before the land reforms were going to be implemented, the ex-landlords were able to read the writings on the wall. They did the manipulations. Remember, rich people are more brilliant than the poor. That is why they are rich. They are more rich, they are more brilliant and cleverer. Now what is happening, of which the inheritors of Iyengarli legacy should be aware, is the Dalit land rights. What is happening to that rights? Dalits in Kerala are not permitted even to agitate for land. I am not speaking about the Adivasi land question. I had been a part of the C.K. Janu's agitation. I was a spokesman for a long time. That is a separate history. Dalit land rights. Dalits are not permitted to. Left parties suppress Dalit agitations for land. Because the left parties think that as far as the production relations are concerned, if you speak in Marxian terms, mode of production, forces of production and relations of production. As far as relations of production are concerned, they have already done what needed to be done. Now, what is to be done is the development question. There was a development crisis in Kerala in the 80s. I was also participating in that discussion. But then the attempt was to highlight that productive forces were not expanding. But then I took the position that productive forces are not expanding because of the fetters created by the outmoded relations of production. I have this in my first chapter in my book, The Development Crisis of Kerala. So the position is taken that on the land front everything needed to be done was done. Now what is required is to address the development question. So the right to agitate is suppressed. Now in this, as was mentioned at the outset, because of all these, the Dalits are not able to enter and influence two major arenas where knowledge is generated, collated and transmitted. Knowledge generation, collation and transmission take place in the academia and media. In the academia, some of them have a presence. But that presence is not in such a way that they are in an effective position to determine the academic policies, higher education policies. That's representation. I am speaking with reference to the higher education sector, particularly the university sector of higher education in general. I had written about it, a few articles I had written in Hindu, then in Indian Express about this. Then in the media, whether you take print media or electronic media, Dalit Adivasi presence you don't see at all. And these are the arenas which influence, condition the climate of thinking, knowledge generation. You can always see these things we are discussing today in a committee. Some persons from the marginalized communities are doing research. But this research is purely empirical. Without any attempt at generalization and theorization. In research, you have various things: philosophy, epistemology, methodology, theory. These are the various aspects of research. This empirical research is not generalized, so much so, abstraction is not made, theory formation is not attempted. So I would say that Iyengar had expressed the ambition that I want to see before my death 5 graduates from among the untouchables. I paraphrase you. I like to see at least 5 theoreticians from among these scholars emerging who have a counterfactual and a counter theorization which gets noted in the scholarly, intellectual world. Once more, I thank the organizers of this program. Now, what I have presented is a set of points for the sheer purpose of initiating a discussion. Don't ask me questions because I don't have any answers. But let us discuss and debate as much as possible within the limited allotted time. Thank you, Chairman.